Our topic is teamwork in the classroom, which is at the heart of inclusive education. Let's start by introducing the essential concepts: inclusive education and teamwork. Could you please tell us what are the core values which form the basis for all teachers in inclusive education?
Yeah, so the European Agency has a profile for inclusive teachers, and they identify 4 areas, 4 competencies that all teachers for inclusive education should have. So the first one is valuing learner diversity, all the different students that you might be working with, recognising their differences but valuing them each as individuals, and also seeing them as a resource and an asset to the classroom, that they bring all their differences together. The second one is that we should support all learners, so everybody should have the same access, the same support, the same help, and that teachers actually give high expectations to everybody, no matter their background, no matter their progress to date. The third one is that we should work with others. So this talks about teamwork in the classroom, and this is really our focus, that we should be a team, that we should be working together, that we should actually collaborate, and this is really essential. And then the fourth one is the idea that we're always continuing to develop, so continuing personal, professional development, that we can always learn, we can always develop our skills. So this is also relevant for teamwork in the classroom, because we can improve, we can develop, we can learn from others, and our teamwork will improve.
What do you mean by teamwork in the classroom?
So teamwork in the classroom, let's start with teamwork, really a group of people that come together towards a common goal. So they each individually contribute, but then have to negotiate and work and discuss and find a way to work together towards some common outcome that is going to benefit. Now, in the classroom, we're thinking particularly about teachers, teaching assistants, other professionals coming together for the benefit of the pupils. So finding ways to work together, to be a team, to share each other's experience for the benefit of the pupils. Now, sometimes there will be disagreements, there will be difficulties, there will be challenges, but that's one of the great things, in that people then begin to bring their strengths, their understanding, maybe they change their perspectives. So the teamwork is actually a journey of learning new ways of doing things, of maybe putting other personal preferences aside, finding ways to work that is broader and more diverse.
When thinking about team working in the classroom, what competencies are needed for teachers to work in teams?
So again, if you go back to the European Agency profile for the inclusive teacher, they identify 3 particular areas that really encompass what you need in order to be able to work in a team. So the first one is your attitude, the second one is your knowledge, and the third is your skills. But really, although we think of them as individual categories, they influence each other, they have an impact on each other. So it's trying to think through, how can we develop those 3 areas together? Now, this is a good challenge for student teachers as they're training to find ways of developing these skills, but also qualified teachers need to continue developing, finding ways to put these things into action, but to find ways to develop their own competencies. Now, we're particularly concentrating on teamwork in the classroom, but this would also apply to teamwork in other ways for teachers, so with parents, with other educational professionals, and that is something to be discussed elsewhere.
How can your attitudes impact teamwork?
Well, this is a very good question, because attitudes are often hidden, so we see them in the way that people work when they come out together. But really, inclusive education challenges our attitudes as to whether we can be inclusive, whether we can work in a team. And attitudes are very important for this. This is a way of thinking about how we relate to different people, how we want to work with others, learn from others, whether we see people as above us in the hierarchy or below us or on a level, whether we value each person's contribution no matter where they sit in that hierarchy. And really, again, this is a challenge for student teachers to think, what can I develop? Who can I watch? What role models do I have to see those people that work very well in teams? So can I start to emulate those values, those attitudes, those ways of working? And our attitudes really encompass the whole dimension of collaboration. Do I think teamwork is valuable? Do I think it's important? So this is a challenge. What is your attitude to teamwork? And from there, you can begin to develop the other skills that you'll need. Leah, we know that attitudes can affect teamwork. Can you give us a real-life example of how teacher attitudes can affect teamwork in the classroom?
Yeah, sure. So a few years ago I was involved in an Erasmus Plus funded project called Thrice. So this was teaching for holistic, relational and inclusive early childhood education. And some of the work we did in the Irish part of the project was looking at relationships in the classroom. And what was really special about this piece of work was that it involved the whole school community. So everybody was involved, teachers, special needs assistants, the librarian, the secretary, the caretaker, everybody in the whole school community kind of came together. But in terms of teamwork and collaboration in the classroom, what was really interesting was that through this project, the kind of barriers across staff roles started to break down. So for example, previously maybe if a teacher had a kind of professional question that they weren't sure about, they might ask a colleague, all right, but they'd ask another teacher, you know. So through this project, when we were evaluating it afterwards and having conversations with the people involved, they said one of the biggest benefits of this kind of relational approach across the whole school was that they started to recognise the expertise in other groups of staff. So it might not have occurred to a teacher before to ask a special needs assistant, a teaching assistant for their opinion, and yet there was a huge bank of expertise there. So they were missing out on that expertise by not engaging in it. So once those barriers began to break down, it meant that different groups of staff could really collaborate. Or, you know, let's say the secretary might have been the first person to see the child on the way in the door and see a face like thunder and think, oh, okay, I need to let the teacher know now just to tread lightly here. Or it just made a big difference to the staff team as a whole to be able to rely on each other and draw on the expertise that was there.
How about knowledge? What kind of knowledge and understanding are demanded for teamwork in the classroom?
One of the pieces of knowledge or kind of areas of knowledge that I think is really important is what are the benefits of collaborative working, of team working, because once you know what you're trying to achieve and what the benefits might be, it actually directs what else you want to learn. So one of the things that's really important during your training is to build up a kind of theoretical understanding of teamwork, of collaboration, really underpinning what you're going to do. But then at the same time, you want practical skills, you want some experience. So for student teachers going out on a placement, you want to be thinking, what can I observe in this situation? How are these teachers working together? How can they plan together? And building up that knowledge from a practical situation. But at the same time, you want to be discerning and think about, is this good practice? So you're going back to the theory and thinking through, what are we trying to achieve? What is education about? How can the different diverse teams bring out something new in the education? Another quite important area of knowledge is language and terminology. So we communicate well when we understand each other, when we use language that makes sense, but language can be quite divisive. So when we're working in a team, when we're working with a group of learners, it's quite important to think through the language we use and to maybe talk to each other to find some common words that really encapsulate what we want to say. And be careful that if somebody does approach us and say this language is not acceptable, that we spend time trying to understand their perspective, reflect on our own practice and think maybe there's a different way of speaking, a different use of language that we could use. And finally, I think another piece of knowledge which really overlaps with attitudes is the power dynamics that exist within the school. So as a teacher, you maybe have teaching assistants, you may have co-teachers, you may have your leadership teams, you may have other professionals. But in the classroom, you really need to work as a team, as an equal partnership. So putting aside the power relations, so you need to think through and really understand what the different roles are in the classroom. You need to know your staff, you need to know your power structures, and then be able to find a way to work together.
What are the essential skills and abilities related to teamwork in the classroom?
Yeah, the skills that you need to work as a team are quite diverse. So one of the most basic, I guess, but quite difficult to do, is learn to communicate well with other people. So communication skills, whether that be verbal in a conversation, whether you're using some form of technology, whether you're using an online space that collects all the information together, we need to be able to communicate well together, and that is a skill. You need to understand, it comes back to the idea of different language that you might use, different power structures between people, but you really need to work on your communication skills. That is key. That's also key in a teaching situation because you're communicating with your learners and hoping to teach them well. Another skill really is around your subject matter. So you need to be able to communicate maybe a complex term or a complex concept, but you need to do it in a way that matches with the other people in your team. So maybe you work out ways that you have particular expertise and you're able to communicate that way. You need skill to work within the different structures of your classroom. So you have your own team, but you might connect with another classroom in the same year group that you're working in. You might work with another school. You need to be able to use non-verbal communication. So you need to be able to maybe signal to your team during the lesson that something needs to change, but you can't say that in front of the students. So maybe you need to work on skills in that way. And then really skills to develop yourself. So how can I improve my knowledge? How can I improve my attitude? That takes skills for your own personal development.
And then about the context of the classroom. How is teamwork shaped by the context in which teachers work?
If you think of the bioecological systems model, so Bronfenbrenner, for example, you think of a set of nested systems. If you put the classroom at the centre, that's like the microsystem. That is what is happening every day. The teacher is in there, hopefully within a team, but maybe on their own. But that classroom is situated within a school. So the teacher in that classroom or the team are connecting with other people and they're influenced by what is happening in the school. They also influence other people. That school is situated maybe in a region, a municipality, some form of local area, which might have a school board, and they might set certain regulations, certain systems in place that you must follow. So as you can see so far, what you do in a classroom is influenced by the people around you, whether you can do teamwork, how that teamwork could happen. That local area, that municipality, is situated in a country, and the country may have a national curriculum, they may have government guidelines that everybody must follow. And all of those things are affected over time. If a government changes, if a new minister comes into effect, if new laws are made. So your context has a huge influence on your teamwork. What is it possible, what you would like to do, what staff are available. And at each level, there is a kind of bi-directional influence. You are influencing them, they are influencing you. So it's very important that you think about your context, what is possible, and potentially if you would like to do things that aren't currently possible, that you think about ways that maybe you could start to influence the next circle.
When thinking about teamwork in the classroom in a practical way, what kind of examples are there in teamwork?
Well, one important example could be co-teaching, which is when two or more teachers, class and or support teachers, plan, teach and assess together for a diverse group of students. There are a lot of co-teaching methods. The most common are one teach, one observe, and one teach, one assist. In the first model, one teacher conducts the lesson, and the other teacher observes the student learning process and collects different data which have been previously decided. In the second model, so one teach, one assist, one teacher teaches the full group lesson, and the other teacher helps and rooms for individual students, often providing additional support for learning and behavior management. There is another important model that is the parallel teaching, that consists in splitting the class into two groups where teachers teach the same information at the same time, but to a smaller group. So there is a similar model called alternative teaching, where one teacher conducts the lessons for the most of the class, and the other teacher conducts a lessons in a modified version to a smaller group. There is a more complex model of co-teaching that is the station teaching, which consists of dividing the class in 3 or more groups, where students can rotate through the stations while the teachers teach the same material to each group in a different ways. And if there are more stations than teachers, at least one is focused on individual work, and the others may be managed by students. The last co-teaching method is the team teaching, where both teachers are together in the room, taking turns teaching to the whole class like co-presenters. How can you co-plan in a team?
Well, co-planning is very important, and if you're going to work together as a team, then you need to plan together as a team. The starting point really is to think through the purpose of your lesson, to work together, to understand that you have the right ideas, that they're the same, that you're united in what you're doing. Then you really need to think about the different roles and responsibilities within the lesson. So who will take which role, who will start teaching, who will be working to support the young people, who will deal with behaviour. You'll think about the lesson structure, the timetable. You'll think about the rules for behaviour. So for each student or pupil, what really is important? How will you deal with any disruption or any problems in the classroom? And then also you're thinking through your activities or your assessment at the end of the lesson, and a way of doing that together.
How can you co-assess students?
So there's probably 2 different ideas here. On the one hand, you want to assess your lesson and how the learning has gone. And you might involve pupils or students in that process. You might ask them to give you some feedback on the lesson, what they found helpful, what they maybe didn't understand, how the work has gone. You're also thinking as your team, your teachers, what did we teach well? What did we miss out? What could go better next time? So in that sense, you're thinking about the lesson itself and how the learning has gone. But you also want to assess the learning outcomes or objectives. Did you teach what you intended to teach? Have the students learnt it? Have they developed their understanding? And so there's lots of different methods that you might use in your normal teaching. And as a team, you now need to come together and decide which ones are we going to use together. Have we achieved our goals? Have the pupils learnt well? And that really is a collaborative cooperation in which you need to agree together.
I think that also pupils should be involved in their teaching and learning processes. How do you include the pupils' voice in teamwork?
Yeah, well, I agree with you actually, because participation and diversity are really the hallmarks of inclusive education. So we want pupils to be involved, and we want them to be able to say what they feel, what they think, their perspectives. But what's really important is that the context is one in which pupils feel safe. They feel they are able to be honest without any negative repercussions. They feel that they will be heard, that what they say might be acted upon, that people will actually work with them. So it can be quite demanding because you have lots of different pupils or students. They have different ways of communicating. You might have those that are disabled in some way. And so you are trying to find ways to make sure that each person is valued, they are heard, that they're able to communicate. One possible way of including pupils in their learning is the Montessori approach. And this is an approach in which the pupil themselves directs their learning. So they think about what they would like to learn, what way they would like to learn in, the methods that they would use, whether they work on their own or collaboratively with classmates. And in that setting, the teacher really is there to facilitate what the pupil is doing, so they are leading their own learning.
How can therapists or teaching assistants and teachers work together in the classroom?
Well, one of the most natural co-workers in teamwork is teacher assistant. The teacher and teacher assistant can plan, implement, and also evaluate the teaching process together and share their responsibilities of the teaching process. Of course, the teacher always have the main responsibility for teaching, but teaching assistant is a very essential part of teaching when teaching a diverse group and diverse pupils, as they can have responsibility for certain pupils or group. The teacher must recognize the assistant's tacit knowledge. They often have a lot of experience with pupils and know very well their strengths and challenges too. And so in that way, the teacher assistant is a real expert in teaching and learning situations. In addition, the teacher can work in the classroom with therapists, for example, physiotherapist, speech therapist, and occupational therapist. They can participate in lessons, do individual tasks, or to contribute the joint training with pupil they meet. As a therapist, you don't always have to work one-to-one with the pupil. When working together in the classroom, the therapist see the pupil with other pupils, which broadens their perspective of the teaching process and learning process. What are the challenges in the teamwork in the classroom?
Yes, one of the challenges for teamwork is finding time and space to meet together, particularly if you have busy teaching schedules, also considering an additional work at the beginning. Space could be also problematic if there were small classes and few free places in the schools where co-teaching methods could be implemented.
One of the other challenges is if people have very different ideas and different plans for the teaching, and then they have to try and resolve them and they're finding it difficult to work together.
Yeah, and there might also be challenges to do with the context, whether your colleagues in your classroom or school or system even want to work with you in teams, and what attitudes they have and what kind of skills they have.
So what are the benefits of teamwork in the classroom?
So one of the benefits of teamwork is that it brings different perspectives and experiences. So teachers can develop new ideas, practices and interpersonal communication skills.
Yeah, and another benefit is that in teamwork, pupils see different types of teaching and different explanations and different activities, which can help in their learning processes and, of course, in their different learning styles.
Yeah, and another benefit, which you mentioned as a challenge as well, is that in the beginning it can be a lot of extra work and take a lot of extra time, but over time as partnerships develop, then teachers actually reduce their workload because they're sharing the work, sharing the preparation. So actually over time, it actually reduces time